You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.
It's Wednesday night, time for the Paranormal Experience radio show with host Kat Hobson. Kick back, relax, and get ready to learn. Welcome to the show. Now, here's Kat.
Good evening. Welcome to Paranormal Experience Radio here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I am Kat Hobson, your host, and we have a tremendous show lined up for you tonight. I just know you're going to enjoy this every bit as much as I am. And I also, before we get started, would like to just offer prayers, positive energy flows, thoughts, whatever you have. Join me for the people of California. They're still missing them by the score. There are people that have lost everything while trying to save others. There is just a hideous experience happening for so many people. And it doesn't matter if they're, Californians or, just plain Americans, whatever. They're humans. And all of the ostracizing that politics have caused us to do lately does not matter one bit in a situation like this. So please, if you can help, reach out. There's so many organizations trying to help these people. If you can't help financially, at least please help spiritually, because it is just a huge, huge deal. And that's what we do, right? We're all part of the same family. Tonight's guest is someone who I have admired and enjoyed very much over the last several years. I did not know that he was one of the people that I was reading in Fate magazine and in everything. Mysterious Universe. He's done shows on so many networks. As soon as you hear your voice, you're going to be like, oh my word, it's him. And yes, it is. He's written 41 books, with more coming. He has a new book out right now, and it's brilliant. It just came out. Top Secret, Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. It's Nick Redfern. And this is going to be awesome. Hi, Nick. How are you?
Hey, Kat. I'm doing good, thanks.
Well, I'm so glad you're here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on the show.
Well, we met last year in Arkansas, which was just fabulous for me. I'd never been to Eureka Springs, and for number one, I'd never been to a UFO conference, because my focus is paranormal investigation as far as what I do personally. And I have been kind of leaning in that direction with my interest being drawn there. And all of a sudden, there I am at a conference. And that was a good one.
I was going to say, that was actually my first time at the Eureka Springs conference. Although it's been going on for many years, that was the first time I've actually been there. So it was sort of cool, and it's always good when you get a good size audience and attendance.
Well, and that was their 31st anniversary event.
That's right. Yeah.
Is that not the longest running of any going on, at least in the U.S.?
I think it probably is. I'm not really aware of any other ones. Maybe the MUFON conference.
Could be.
Yeah, maybe the MUFON conference, but certainly I would say, if not the Ozarks, one has to be sort of second or third in line, I would think.
Well, I would too. And, it was really fun because one of the people who drew me toward the MUFON side of discussions over past years has been Chase Klotsky, and it was my first time to ever see her lecture. And I was fascinated about the skulls. It was relevant to her forensic work on the Peruvian skulls, the elongated skulls. And I had finally gotten to meet Stan Friedman. So that was, I had boxes getting checked left and right, and then I got to hear you lecture, and I was like, oh my word, this is amazing. And, I said that you had written 41 books. That's got to be a little higher now, isn't it, with the new ones?
Well, it actually is, but I've sort of lost count as well. It just means I keep thinking I'm going to have to sort of go to the shelves and one by one count them, because some of them, there's like different editions and like foreign editions of some of the books and reprints. So it's difficult to sort of actually say how many, are sort of standalone books, but it's close to 50 now, something like that. So.
Well,
one of the days I will get the accurate figure.
Well, I tell you what, as long as you keep putting them out, I'll keep buying them, and I don't care how many there are.
Well, thank you.
You've already sold a Bigfoot book so far since the show was started tonight to Brenda in our chat room, so it's a good thing. But I know that the Men in Black was really a motivation for you with getting started with a lot of this stuff. And I know that on your blog page, your web page, that you explained how that occurred, what got you into that. Could you share it with the audience?
Yeah, how I got involved in the UFO subject, you mean?
I do.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, I'm one of those people who sort of never, I've never, as far as I know, been abducted. I've not seen a UFO landing 20 feet from me or anything like that. But what got me interested is that my dad was in the British Royal Air Force, and he worked as a radar mechanic. And he was involved in 3 incidents in the 1950s. This was still the Cold War with the Russians, where strange, high-flying, fast-flying objects were approaching the English coastline from Europe. And the first thought was, well, it's got to be the Russians. And so fighter planes were sent up to try and intercept what they assumed were Russian planes. And some of the pilots reported seeing these large, brightly lit objects were so brilliantly light they couldn't tell what they were. Other people described sort of like classic flying saucers. And over the course of 3 nights, the UFOs sort of ran rings all around the pilots, and they couldn't get close to them. They would sort of like shoot away at high speed and then hover at like 5,000 feet and then shoot away again. Then eventually the planes had to return to their bases because they were running low on fuel. And this, as I said, went on for 3 nights, and after the 3rd night, it all came to a sudden halt. And but everybody involved, the ground crew, the pilots, the radar operators, and the radar mechanics like my dad, everybody who had some sort of input or involvement was taken into a room and told, you won't talk about this. You've signed the British government's Official Secrets Act, which is a piece of legislation like an NDA, like a non-disclosure agreement, but it's sort of like a piece of legislation put together by the government. And my dad actually didn't tell me till I was probably around about 12, something like that. And when he told me, it sort of really opened my eyes, not just because it was my own dad, but also because he worked in the military on radar, and he knew what the radar screen showed, and et cetera, et cetera. And from there, I sort of started to begin reading books by people like Brad Steiger and Charles Berlitz and Alan Hynek and Leonard Stringfield, people who had sort of written UFO book, and John Keel particularly, and a lot of these authors had sort of written books long before I was even born, and but I started sort of reading their books, and that kind of got me interested, and then when I finished school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I worked on a rock music magazine, fashion magazine, and like celebrity news, that kind of thing, and I sort of then decided after a while to sort of combine the interest with the paranormal and UFOs with the background in journalism.
Well, you've done quite well with that.
Well,
I would say.
It's one of those things that, there's certain things all of us can do, I guess hopefully fairly well, and you do it, I mean, I always tell people there's two things I can do in terms of work, and I've done them both. One is working as a writer, and the other one is a forklift driver, which I also did when I really didn't know what I was going to do when I first left school, and the UK was in a recession at the time, and so I just fell back on the forklift driving. Did that about 6 or 7 years, and I'm sort of like a dab hand if anybody needs, a 1-ton crate lifting 40 foot up into the air onto a shelf. I'm the person to do it,
I could have used you a couple of weeks ago. My husband bought a new lathe, and we had to have people come and unload it and bring it in and situate it and such. And that's, as I'm sure that's quite a feat to be able to manage that. It was a little scary.
Get used to it, and I did that for quite a few years back in England. But I sort of had that interest in UFOs and things like that, and I said I worked on this magazine for a while, and when the magazine closed after a couple of years, I thought, well, what on earth am I going to do now? It's either do something I hate for the next 50 years, then retire, then die,
I know.
Or am I going to do something I really enjoy? So what I did, I saved some money up, and I literally had about enough money. I calculated that I could live for like the next 6 months on what I got in the bank, and this was when I was back in England, and I thought, well, I'm going to try and write a book or put an idea together and try and sell it to a publisher, and if it doesn't work out, well, I tried, but I'll give myself 6 months to figure out, it's going to work or it's not. And fortunately, I came up with a couple of ideas, and a publisher in England, Simon & Schuster, liked the ideas and said, we'll take you on. And so that was basically, I carried on from there, really. It was just a case of from there to here, I suppose.
That's just amazing. When you were talking about do something you don't love for 50 years and then, what do you have left at that point? I developed that mindset about 10 years ago, maybe more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I've always been a bit of a pirate all my life, and I decided just to, implement that into my everyday life.
Well, I always tell people, I think everybody's got something that they're really good at, and enjoy. And so I always tell people, if you can take that hobby or that interest and make it into like a career as well, and doing something that you enjoy under your own terms, and not having some old boss telling you to move this or do that, which if you can do something that you enjoy on your own terms, I think that's a great way to do it, and that's what I always strive to do. I'm not someone who kind of does well being given orders. I like to just do my own thing. I like to do my own thing, and if people like it, that's fine, and if people don't like it, well, that's how it goes.
Well, that's fine too, right? Because
yeah.
I have learned over time. Sometimes I'm a dweeb when I get nervous, and it shows. But as a rule, I try to just be the best person I can be and make sure that I don't hurt anyone. That's my goal. Those are my goals in life. And even when I'm a dweeb, I always go back and apologize. I'm like, I was so tense or so whatever. And since I changed my mindset, it seems to be much better because I love what I do. And it does make a tremendous difference. I don't sweat the small stuff as much, to quote, 70s books, and you obviously thrive with this choice of style.
Well, yeah, I mean, I enjoy what I do, and, as long as I've sort of got the enthusiasm for it, and that doesn't go away, then, I don't see why it should, I'll keep on doing it. And, but I like to be sort of very kind of structured in the way I do it. What I sort of typically do, I like to sort of work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I like to keep what I call job hours, So I get up, have breakfast, and I usually start round about 9 and finish round about 5. So I do like an 8-hour day, Monday to Friday. Then evenings, unless I'm doing like radio tonight to promote things. Other than that, I sort of stop at 5 o'clock, Monday to Friday. I don't work at night. I don't work at weekends. I just, I feel like, I do like a 40-hour week, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, doing the writing on the books and the articles. And then that sort of prevents me from sort of getting, a case of constant burnout. So if you do it, I couldn't do it 24/7 because I enjoy having like a social life and a normal life outside of this. So that's why, as I said, 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, the laptop goes into sleep mode. I literally don't touch it till like 9 o'clock Monday morning, and weekends and evenings for fun, and
That's brilliant.
Yeah, I like to sort of keep it balanced,
And that's from trying to do that with what I'm doing now, I found that very difficult because I love structure, and I'm ADD, so I have to have structure. But all of a sudden, I was doing things that I was responsible for my own structure, and it was a difficult thing to kind of get into the flow of. And once I got the hang of that, I still will work later if I'm in the middle of something and I'm trying to puzzle it out. But I probably shouldn't. I should walk away from it for a while.
Well, I mean, different writers have different ways of doing it. I mean, I have friends who like to sort of work through the night. They sort of feel more inspired, kind of starting at like 9 o'clock and going on till, 3 or 4 in the morning and doing it that way. And but I think every writer has like a bit of a different way. But I always tell people that everyone, I think, has got at least one book in them, one great story that they could turn into a book. And, I mean, you don't need to be, some sort of brilliantly minded person. I mean, at school, I was pretty useless at school. I actually didn't go to college or university. I was just like one of these kids who didn't want to know, and, school was for just hanging around with your friends and, taking your girlfriend to the school dance or whatever, I just wasn't interested in school at all. Me and my friends were sort of like outcasts, and I did not do well education-wise at all. But I realized, when you get out of school and you're suddenly in, quote, the real world, the big world, you realize, well, I've got to do something to survive and live. And so it was like, in minutes, it's like, okay, I'm going to find something I want to do. And I made it happen. And I think anyone can make it happen, whatever it might be for them, and you just have to take a chance like I did. Like I said, when that 6-month period I gave it myself, I could have been at the end of that 6 months, I could have been out on the street, but I took the approach that, well, okay, it's got to happen. It has to happen.
It has to happen. I have to have a roof. Yes. Yeah. Well, we are coming up on our first break. It's a 3-minute break. And this is just a musical interlude. I hope y'all enjoy it. This is my chair dancing music. So enjoy, and we'll be right back with you.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Welcome back. You're listening to Paranormal Experienced Radio. I'm Kat Hobson, your host, with my guest, Nick Redfern. And we were discussing, Nick, your motivation, your schedule that you've created for yourself, because you are a prolific author. You have so many pieces in your body of work that, and I'm an avid reader, I could go for a year and not complete everything that you've written. It's good stuff. Well, probably I could, because it is such good stuff. But I find it admirable that you found a way to create that structure for yourself. Like I said, I'm very blown away by it. I think it's amazing.
Oh, well, thanks. And I mean, what I always try and do, is, as well as being a writer, I'm a reader of books as well. So I always try and put myself in the mind of the reader, in terms of, well, let's come up with something new, not just go over old ground and rehash stuff. So I always, whatever the subject is, I try and find new information or a new slant or a new angle on the phenomenon. So, whether it's UFOs, Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, I tend to sort of focus mainly on the UFO phenomenon and cryptozoology, which is the study of unknown animals like Bigfoot and the Yeti and the Chupacabra and so on, Mothman, things like that. So, that's sort of the way I kind of do it. Those are the sort of subjects I like to write about and research.
Well, but so much about just about everything anomalous, and you write about the few things that keep me up nights. I've been involved in the paranormal field publicly for about 10 years, and very few things will actually give me pause when I stop and contemplate what could be out there or what could happen, because I tend to just approach things as they come. But the black-eyed children is a phenomenon that you covered in your Paranormal Parasites book, and that just blows my mind.
Oh, yeah, that's like a really weird and creepy subject. For people who haven't heard of the black-eyed children, they are these sort of creepy, sinister-looking kids that people have seen, where they have sort of very pale skin, usually wearing these dark hoodies, and they have these sort of totally black eyes. And I don't just mean in the center of the eyes totally black. I mean the whole eye, or the eyes, are totally black. And these stories of encounters with the black-eyed children began slowly in the latter part of the 1990s. The first one that really sort of took off came from a guy named Brian Bethel, who was a journalist in Texas and still is. And he had an encounter late one night with these two creepy kids, pale skin, large black eyes, who tried to find a way into his vehicle. And he was sort of just terrified by the look of them. And his story went online. And then from there, after Brian's story went on the internet, other people came forward with their own accounts. And a friend of mine, David Weatherly, who wrote sort of the definitive book on the subject called Black-Eyed Children, David, I think probably now has got hundreds of accounts from witnesses, and there's all sorts of theories as to what these black-eyed kids are. Some people think they're aliens, other people think they're sort of alien hybrid human kind of creatures, and then you have sort of the supernatural occult theory or even demonic theory for what they might be. But there's no doubt that these reports, are sort of escalating around the country and elsewhere as well. And they always try and find a way into the house. But it's kind of like the old vampire legends where they don't force their way in. They try and find a way to be invited, which does sort of parallel those old legends and mythologies of vampires where they can't enter your home until you invite them in. And that's why so many people have not let them in. They've just seen them and they've been so creeped out by their weird appearance and terrified by it, so they slam the door. And the strange thing is that the kids will sort of leave frustrated because it's almost in a weird way. It's almost as if they have to abide by certain rules to do things. You know, it's not like they can just do it on their own. They have to. It's almost like there are almost like supernatural rules that they have to follow, which is again sort of like a really weird aspect of it all.
Well, I believe that I read the account by your friend Brian, and when I saw it, I just thought, oh, please, that cannot possibly be a real thing. And then I started researching it because it mesmerized me. It blew me out of the water. Like I said, that is one of the few paranormal instances that I think would just cause me to have an issue were I to come across that. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's the one.
Well, I mean, I think for a lot of people, they're just sort of freaked out by the appearance. You know, the skin is described as like very pale, like in some cases literally like a sheet of paper, like white. And they have these solid eyes, black eyes, and their skin kind of looks like plastic. It doesn't look like real skin. Like there's no creases or lines or shadows or anything. It almost looks like plastic and then painted on. And they don't seem to be fully aware of our customs. And very often when they come out with these lines like, we're homeless, can we come in? Will you let us in so we can have some food? Or we're lost, will you let us in so we can phone our parents? It's always putting the ball in the court, if you like, of the person to try and get the invite inside. But, when people see them, that's when they just freeze, and this look on their face and the strange eyes. But there are some cases, really creepy stories, where people have said that they were determined not to let them in, but it was almost as if they'd been sort of hypnotized or mind-controlled, and they could actually see their own arm, like going to the front door and opening it against their own will. And then, luckily, in most cases, the person sort of is such a state of shock that they break out of this sort of mind control, and then they slam the door. But there are a lot of weird cases like that where it was as if the black-eyed children could take control of the mind of the person.
Yes. And, like even reaching for car locks. It may have been Brian's account that I read where it said that he found himself actually reaching for the door lock on the car to open it.
Was the first one, I think, to report that angle of people's minds sort of being controlled by whatever these things are. But what's interesting is that the stories and reports of the black-eyed children are actually quite similar to the Men in Black stories. Now, when people think of the Men in Black, they think of Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, with the movies. But the reality of the situation is the real Men in Black are nothing like government agents or anything along those lines at all. Like the black-eyed kids, the Men in Black are typically described as like really skinny, pale. They have these large eyes, not black eyes, but large eyes, which they hide behind these wraparound sunglasses. Mm-hmm. But they seem to have the ability to sort of mind control people as well. But if you read the witness testimonies, they actually don't really sound human. They sound almost like something that's trying to camouflage itself as human, but they're not doing a perfect job of it.
I perceive that as just from descriptions that I've heard and eyewitnesses that I've had an opportunity to discuss this with. It's almost like reptilians who are having to come forward because there's something else going on. Somebody's had an experience. And I know that you and I kind of had a chuckle because you had told me that the Men in Black would be a great place to start with your writings. And thinking that I had bought your book, I'm going through it and I can't find you, and I'm thinking, well, he must be writing commentary through this other. I picked up Gray Parker's book.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. But that was so odd.
Yeah, he wrote the first book on the Men in Black back in 1956, a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Yes. And it told the story of a guy named Albert Bender who lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, who set up a UFO group called the International Flying Saucer Bureau. But in no time after setting the group up, Bender was visited by these three Men in Black. And that's where the term actually goes way back to like 1952, 51. And but Bender said the Men in Black were not like government people. He said they're almost like today's shadow people, for people who might have heard of them. They're like a shadowy figure that materialized through the wall of his bedroom and then sort of psychically threatened him to walk away from the subject or else. And Albert Bender kind of ignored it for a while, and then he started to get sick and ill, which is something you get in a number of these cases. When you're in proximity to them, people fall ill and sick, as if almost like a supernatural infection kind of thing. And eventually Albert Bender did walk away from it all, left the whole subject behind and never looked back. And he only died 2 years ago at the age of 94. So, getting out away from them actually worked in his favor. But Gray Barker's book told the story, and then before he quit completely, Albert Bender wrote his own kind of autobiography about his encounters with the Men in Black, and that book was called Flying Saucers and the Three Men, and the three men being the MIB that visited him. But it's kind of ironic, that the movie version portrays them so strongly as government agents, but practically all the witnesses describe them as sort of looking almost like the Walking Dead. They're sort of pale and sickly looking and gaunt, and they kind of walk in a jerky fashion. And as I said, they sort of look vaguely like us, but you look too close to them and you'll see, a lot of really weird differences.
Very odd differences. The footage that was caught in the hotel entrance in, was it Switzerland or Sweden, of the men? There was footage caught, or a photo taken from security footage of the two men coming in either, was it Switzerland or Sweden, coming into the hotel?
Oh, no, that was right here in the United States.
It was in the U.S.? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of years ago. That's an interesting one because it kind of, caught a lot of people's attention, this film footage taken in a lobby in a hotel. And you've got these two guys just standing out, just bizarre with black suits and skinny black ties and white shirts and these old-style sort of 1950s hats. Mm-hmm. And the staff there did talk about it and said, well, yeah, we got them on film, and they were weird, and everybody was talking about them, and then they vanished. But, the interesting thing is there was no attempt to kind of jump on the bandwagon and create a big, publicity thing on the part of the hotel staff. They were kind of like, they talked about it reluctantly, and then the whole thing was dropped because they just didn't want to really deal with it. But you can find that footage online of these,
yes.
These two guys sort of striding through the lobby of the hotel, and it's sort of it's interesting because there actually aren't too many photographs of the Men in Black. As far as I know, that's the only piece of footage, and I'm only aware of about 4 or 5 photographs that have been taken over the years of a Man in Black. So in that sense, it was kind of a breakthrough on the subject.
Well, I'm always shocked that there isn't more on that, because when I was reading Parker's book describing the experiences that all of those men went through, the people were very blatant about how they approached their homes when their families were there. Their phones would have obvious clicks and stuff indicating wiretapping.
Yeah.
In the day, I mean, they were not reticent about making their presence known whatsoever.
No, that's one of the things that the Men in Black are very good at doing. They turn up on people's doorsteps, threaten people. In some cases, they kind of allude to the idea that someone might die. But as far as I know, there's only 1 or 2 cases that fall into that category. But what they tend to do is that they're very good at threatening people and frightening them to where they don't need to take it any further because the person backs away usually from the subject anyway, just like Albert Bender did.
Yes.
So, in that sense, they're sort of psychologically very good at terrifying people. And you get a lot of weird things, like people wake up in the middle of the night, the phone's ringing, and of course, if you hear the phone ring in the middle of the night, everybody worries it's bad news, so you answer the phone. But in many of these cases, after the Men in Black have visited, the witnesses have reported getting strange static and odd noises on the phone, like electronic bleeping noises at like 2, 3 a.m., almost as if it's like an attempt to destabilize people by, affecting their sleep patterns and frightening them and worrying that the Men in Black are going to come back. So, they're very good at, putting people into that sort of negative state of fear.
Well, and that does permeate every aspect of your life. If you have a situation that's going on that's that unsettling, that's, I would have probably walked away too. And a surprising number of those people involved with the group did not. So they were very fierce. Yeah,
I mean, different people have taken like a different approach to the Men in Black. There are some cases where people have told them to sort of get the hell out of the house. And the weird thing is they don't sort of try and fight back. It's almost like you put a glitch in their approach, and people they don't seem to know what to do, and they quickly leave. It's almost as if the image of these sort of dangerous figures, which they clearly seem to be, but you stand up against them. And then in a number of the cases, the witnesses have said it was as if, quite literally, like you put a glitch in them and they didn't know what to do or how to handle it. And, as if they were programmed in some way and then the program had been affected,
Well, that happens with visitations that people have even when they're not abducted by Greys, right?
Well,
that you can throw them off somehow.
Yeah, and I think, it's like anything that when you're dealing with the supernatural, if you've got the sort of the strength to say, leave, go away, I think just the power of the sheer emotion, if you like, can sort of put up a barrier that keeps these things away. And I think the more vulnerable you are, complete opposite to that. If you're vulnerable, it's very easy for these supernatural things to get their grips into someone who may have sort of low self-esteem or unsure about themselves, things like that. I think people like that are far more in danger of falling, into the clutches of these things, and because their character, is something that is easy to manipulate.
Yes. Well, that's an interesting point. My grandmother, I've often said, was New Age before New Age was cool. And she was very aware of psychic ability. She was very into astrology. She was just an interesting woman for her time period. When things would come up in discussions like Ouija boards and that kind of thing, even back then, she was like, you don't do something that has the potential to invite something in. When the movie The Exorcist came out, she adamantly refused to allow me to watch it with her. Like, I was sent from the room. I was a teenager. I was like 14 or 15 years old. And I was so affronted by that I just couldn't imagine, why are you being so mean? I might like that. She was like, you don't need to expose yourself to things that can have supernatural powers. You don't know what will be the invitation.
Well, that's one of the things I always tell people is that, if you get into the supernatural and the paranormal, just be careful of what you're getting into, because, sometimes, as I said, you have people who are, their character might not be too strong and these things can overpower them. But you also have the angle of, people deliberately trying to invoke supernatural entities, whether through a Ouija board or other means, that's sort of occult rituals, that kind of thing. Now, I always tell people that it's actually not that difficult to open a door and get something to come through, so to speak. It's much more difficult to dispatch it back where it came from,
Absolutely true.
And I know this because there was a time when, I was trying to figure out what all these things were, and I did get quite involved in things like ritualistic magic and things like this. And what I found was that every time I tried to do something along those lines, something bad would happen, like bad luck, runs of bad luck, or you would just sense like a weird, dark atmosphere over you, and things would start to go wrong.
Yes.
And I saw this as a clear thing that happened every time I got into this, and so I realized that it's either you keep doing this and you keep pushing and things get worse, or you have to find a way to try and get the answers without getting hauled into this supernatural world where clearly we do not really stand much of a chance against.
No, we are not armed. But I'm going to have to interrupt because we are late for our break, but we'll be back in 2 minutes, and enjoy this. Be right back.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And just like that, we're back with my guest, Nick Redfern, tonight, and we have been covering Men in Black, Black-Eyed Children, all kinds of information, and I am learning and enjoying this so much. Nick, thank you again for being here to do this.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on. I always, enjoy, doing shows because, like we said in the break, I think we've all got our own angle where we can contribute. Somebody writes books, somebody does articles, you've got your radio show, and then, of course, you got the most important people, the witnesses. Without the witnesses to these phenomena, we'd have nothing to go on. So you put all that together, and it's like teamwork, where we're all part of a bigger thing, and hopefully we'll all get the answers one day. So.
Well, I think that we will. I get so interested when people are talking, disclosure, we have to have disclosure, the government has to come forward and do these things. And I heard several lectures over last summer by people who said, who are Giorgio Tsoukalos was the main one, who said, we are disclosure. We're not censored. We don't get told no about a subject that we want to cover, but we better have it documented and have some background research with it. I found that interesting because I don't think there's going to be anything landing on the White House lawn or any defining moment. I think if you look around, there's so much that has been shown to the public through their own experiences that people know.
Well, yeah, I think there's one side of disclosure which I think has kind of happened, and that is that, because there are so many shows and, particularly with the internet, and I think people accept it, whether they have seen something or not, they've accepted it as a genuine phenomenon. So in that sense, there has been disclosure because but so many people do believe and do accept that this is what's going on.
Absolutely.
But definitive disclosure, whether something lands on the White House lawn or you've got a situation where UFOs are over every city, one morning when we all wake up. I mean, that hasn't happened, obviously. I kind of don't think it will because it hasn't happened yet. And I think the phenomenon interacts with us massively and very closely and almost personally at times, but it still stays in the shadows in terms of what it really is and where it's from and what their agenda is. So whether or not we'll not get the answers as to what they are or what their agenda is, I'm not sure. But I think, as time goes on, we're going to get more answers as to, at least some of the answers.
I think so too. And I think that the internet, for all of the negative things people have to say about that, is a very positive experience. I know that social media has kind of managed to dumb us down in some ways, but it also gives us access to incredible information, research that we wouldn't be able to get, just on our own. We might not even be aware that it was something we wanted to get. So it's a double-edged sword, but it's a very useful tool for what we do.
Yeah, I mean, social media, it's like anything in life. It has its good points and its bad points. The good point is that you have instant connection, instant communication all around the world, instant news, and you can put your own data out there as well. You go back pretty much not much more than 20 years ago, that would have been all totally unheard of, I think the one downside more than any other is that sometimes, the internet isolates people, particularly kids today, who's really just, have constantly got their heads in their phone, I mean, when I was a kid, Me and my friends, we'd be the little village I lived in central England. I'd be riding our bikes till about 8 o'clock at night, and Mum and Dad would just say, "Oh, make sure you're home by the time the moon's down." If you let your kids do that today, you'd be tasered or something.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And, but it's like, if you think about it, I mean, I think a lot of it is just scare tactics. I mean, kids can still play outside, but they're told that they're not, that it's right, that you shouldn't. They're told, you'll die or you'll be killed or whatever if you do that. But I mean, I remember, we'd all go right on our bikes and, going down hills, and I'd fall off and I'd come back home with like a 6-inch, bruise or a cut, down your leg or your black eye. And of course, I got to school the next day and the teacher would say, "What'd you do?" "I fell off my bike." There'd be no getting the police in and, a government agency to see if your parents were beating you up. It was just, you're a kid, kids are meant to fall off bikes and whatever, and it's just
and not
a
be
shame.
wrapped in cotton wool.
Yeah, and I think it's just a shame that today that social media, which is really, important and a really good thing, but it also has this downside of, like I said, kids just sitting in the bedroom texting each other when they could be having a good time, having adventures and playing, but it's almost like, without getting too paranoid, it's almost like an agenda to just keep people in their place. You can't go out. You're a kid. You can't go outside. You'll be killed. That's not a way to bring kids up.
Well, it's not, and we're going to be discussing that in our second hour because, your new book coming out in 2019, that could be considered one of the topics of it. Not kids being killed, but the conspiracy side of government patterns. But, I think that it is a controlling factor. And I also find it fascinating. I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist, or I wasn't. It's very hard, really, almost not to be at least pondering the possibilities that some of this stuff has to have an agenda. Every time there's a mass shooting, I have learned to look at what's being passed or signed off on through Congress, because usually if I knew what people did to do MK Ultra and all of these things, I would think somebody was being triggered to go at that time. South Carolina was when they were signing the Iranian deal, the Iranian package, to give them all that money and remove the sanctions and stuff. There's stuff all the time.
Well, yeah, I think, there's genuine conspiracies and there are sort of fabricated conspiracies that sort of that have an effect of sort of making the real ones look ridiculous because, a fake one is proved to be a fake, and then people think, well, they must all be fakes. And I think sometimes, there are planted conspiracies which actually aren't real, but it's done to sort of make people think, oh, well, it's all got to be garbage, Yes. And things like that work quite well, and unfortunately. And also, with social media, stories and threads and fears spread quickly, like a virus. I mean, like a physical bodily virus.
Yes.
It sort of spreads across here, there, and everywhere, and everybody knows about it. And that's, again, it's sort of technology. Works for us when it's in a good way, but it can be used against us, when in a bad way. And the thing is to try and figure out, which is the best way to handle it, really.
Well, you're right. And sometimes it's very difficult to ascertain what's the right way.
Yeah, and I think, there's no doubt in my mind that there are genuine conspiracies. And then there are other ones which are so over the top, but which still, have big followings. And I'm interested in some, stories of conspiracies, and I've written a couple of books on the subject. But, my main thing is sort of, the paranormal, UFOs and strange creatures and things like that. Because, I think for me, focusing on one or two specific issues keeps you kind of sane, rather than, after all these different things spinning around your head, you actually probably would go crazy.
Well, that's why I really and truly avoid conspiracy theories as a rule. But there were several instances of bizarre behaviors that led to these mass shootings. And there were two in particular that caught my eye. And I thought, I wonder if this is something that is a pattern. Because I'm a paralegal by training and I love to research. So I went back and started just looking at legislation. What's happening in the government when these things start occurring. And some of the instances, they give you pause. And I thought, nah, that can't possibly be correct. That has to be an absurd coincidence. And you can talk yourself into them, you can talk yourself out of them. But only you can do your own research and see what you believe is true with that, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I always tell people, that if you're interested in something, the best way to find out is to do your own research. I mean, I've written a lot of books like on Chupacabra, Bigfoot, UFOs, etc. And, people can hopefully, get a lot of data from the books I've written. But equally, I think it's important that we should all do our own research as well, because there could be somebody out there right now listening to this show who has a particular interest in one area, and they might just suddenly step on the one thing that we need to solve it, that everybody else has been looking for the last 50, 60 years. You know what I mean? It could be somebody just falls on it. So that's why I think it's important to have new people coming along in the field, and people, just not reliant on somebody else's word, but also doing their own thing, because, it's one things like UFOs and Bigfoot research and stuff like this. It doesn't require, somebody necessarily to have had 50 years in the field of doing research, or like 20 with me or whatever. It's more along the lines of you could just be in the right place at the right time. So,
yes.
I'd always sort of encourage people, if they want to find out about Bigfoot, if you've got an area near where you live where there have been reports, well, go out and do field research as well as reading the books, but do your own thing too.
Absolutely. I have a friend in Wisconsin who I've known for 20-something years online, who has just shared with me that she has begun cryptozoological research. And she's going, not alone anymore because I had a fit, but going into woods and doing studies and research. And she's connected with someone with MUFON now as far as training. Fascinating stuff. And, we've got so much more to cover. We are just about to the top of our hour. I can't believe we've already had an hour go by. So I love this stuff. But we will be back. This is going to be a 5-minute news break. Hopefully there's going to be something positive in that. We all need a little good news. And Nick Redfern and I will be back. Thank you for being here. And you are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. Thank you so much.
NPR podcasts are now available on every platform. Check out all our shows at npr.org/podcasts. That's npr.org/podcasts.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. President Trump is throwing his support behind legislation that would reduce sentences for some drug offenders and help prisoners return to society after incarceration. NPR's Isha Roscoe has more on the endorsement.
Trump says it's important to punish people who break the law. But he says sometimes people are given unjust sentences and they deserve mercy.
Americans from across the political spectrum can unite around prison reform legislation that will reduce crime while giving our fellow citizens a chance at redemption.
The House passed legislation that addressed prisoner reentry programs but would not affect sentencing. Key lawmakers in the Senate are pushing for measures that would include changes to the way criminals are sentenced. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he will only bring the bill to the floor for a vote if there is adequate support. Aisha Roscoe, NPR News, the White House.
California's largest utility saw its stock plunge today amid growing concerns about its potential liability for the state's largest and most deadly fire ever. Marisa Lagos from member station KQED has more.
Pacific Gas and Electric Company stock nosedived to its lowest level in a decade, a little over $25 a share, down from $48 a share last week. The losses came after the company filed a report with federal regulators, warning that it would not have sufficient insurance to cover its losses if its equipment started the still-raging Camp Fire. Andy Smith, the utilities analyst at Edward Jones, says the investment community doesn't like uncertainty.
And there's a ton of uncertainty right now around PG&E. And so rather than wait for answers, they sell shares and head for the hills.
The Camp Fire has killed dozens of people and destroyed over 7,500 homes. For NPR News, I'm Marisa Lagos.
A federal judge says he's unlikely to let Florida election officials automatically count thousands of mail-in ballots that have signatures not matching those on file. Democrats are asking the judge to throw out a state signature match law, saying untrained experts should not be allowed to decide if someone's signature on a mail-in ballot matches their registration form. Florida State Senator Lori Berman, a Democrat in Palm Beach County, says she hopes the court decides to allow more time for the vote count.
We know that Florida is a swing state and that there are lots of close elections. And we know that we might be in a recount situation in the state of Florida. But what we don't expect is to have our elected officials say to stop counting votes. That is not right.
The court has not yet ruled on the case. It's one of half a dozen lawsuits involving 3 statewide races, including U.S. Senator Bill Nelson's race against Governor Rick Scott. The government's main inflation gauge, the Consumer Price Index, took a bump up in October. The Labor Department says prices for a market basket of goods rose 0.3%. Stocks closed lower again today. The Dow was down 205 points. This is NPR. Hurricanes are dropping more rain and causing more flooding than they have in the past. NPR's Rebecca Hersher reports 2 new studies shed some light on why.
The main reason that hurricanes are getting rainier is climate change. A new study finds that Hurricanes Katrina, Irma, and Maria dropped 5 to 10% more rain on New Orleans, Florida, and Puerto Rico than they would have without climate change. Another new study finds that cities themselves can cause extra rain to fall. A team of climate scientists found that when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston last year, the buildings in the city slowed the storm down and pushed moist air up into the atmosphere, where it became rain. Gabriel Vecchi is one of the co-authors.
The more air that you raise up, in general, the more rain that you will have, and that is one of the impacts of these buildings.
When that rain fell onto impervious pavement, it had nowhere to go and contributed to catastrophic flooding. Rebecca Hersher, NPR News.
For a 12th straight year, the U.S. Postal Service is reporting a loss. The post office says declining mail volumes as well as continued costs for its pension and health care obligations have weighed on earnings. The loss of $3.9 billion for the fiscal year ending September 30th is higher than last year's loss of $2.7 billion. Post office says it's awaiting a report from the Trump administration to address what Trump has called the agency's unsustainable financial path. Postal officials continue to ask Congress for help in dealing with mounting pension costs. Post office does say strong holiday package deliveries and an increase in the price of a first-class stamp could help next year. Oil prices rebounded slightly. Oil closed up to $56.25 a barrel. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama, and thank you so much for doing so. I'm Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience Radio, and I am joined tonight by just a wonderful guest, Nick Redfern. We have been talking about any number of things. We've Black-Eyed Children, a little bit of conspiracy, Men in Black. He has a new book out on alien abductions. And it's actually top secret, Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. that just came out the 1st of November, and he has a new book already scheduled for 2019, and that is going to be Cover-Ups and Secrets, Complete Guides to Government Conspiracies, Manipulations, and Deceptions. And I think that's going to be an interesting book, too. You know, Nick, with your research, you are so diverse. You know something about all of this.
Well, I try. You know, there's some things that I don't really touch on, and only because it's things that really, it's just not really sort of caught my attention or imagination that much. One is sort of like ghostly stories, haunted houses, and I don't really get involved much in that because it's just not my area really, and I'm sort of more into, you know, if it's conspiracies, more to do like UFO stuff. I'm not, you know, a big political guy, you know, when it comes to that kind of stuff. So, but, you know, I think it's good. Like I said earlier, I think everybody's got a book in them, even if you only do one. But focus on the thing that really interests you if you do want to do a book, you know, rather than force it, you know.
Well, I would agree with that. I'm fortunate that someone asked if I would share one of my experiences in their book that will be coming out this spring, and I said, well, sure, if you really want to hear about it. And so I'm going to have one of my stories published with someone who I admire greatly this spring. So, ta-da, I'm excited.
That's good.
And it is on something that fascinates me because, like I said, I do the hauntings and paranormal side of things, and it was a very extreme experience that I had up in Ohio. If you ever want to try that, I've got a place for you.
All right.
But, you know, I'm going to go ahead and ask because I'm getting asked and asked and asked about how an Englishman wound up in Texas. And we're going to just go ahead and put that out there right now.
All right.
How did you wind up in Texas?
Well, I live just outside Dallas. I've been here just close to 20 years now. But I like the Dallas area. It's sort of central to everything, you know, Fort Worth, the airport. You know, you're just a couple of hours from Austin, another hour from there to San Antonio. And I came over in 2001, and actually I got a job offer out here, and I didn't really have any ties in the UK. And, you know, I like to travel, you know, here, there, and everywhere. I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool to see the United States. I'd only actually been to the US once before, and that was to do a conference in Laughlin, Nevada at the old UFO Congress.
Yes.
And, you know, I had a good time there, and playing the slots in Las Vegas, and that was fun. And then I got a job offer, and I thought, well, you know, I have nothing to lose to sort of, you know, spend time in another country. And, you know, I enjoyed it. I liked it over here. And then I applied to be, you know, allowed to stay. You know, you go through the process of residency and so on. And so that's what I did. I filled out all the papers, you know, the sort of a 2.5-inch thick stack.
Oh, yeah.
Filled out all the papers and, you know, went to the immigration offices for all the interviews and so on. And from going there to, you know, being fully legal, took me about 18 months, you know, and it was one of those situations where, you know, some people have, you know, talk about, you know, different processes and whatever and nightmare stories, but I didn't experience any of that. I knew what I had to do. I had to fill out the forms out. I had to be on time for the meetings and, you know, be respectful to the staff and things like that. And, you know, and you know, you have to demonstrate that you can support yourself and things like that. So you have to provide all that. And that's what I did. You know, I just went through the whole process and bit by bit. And I said that was back in 2001. So we're sort of talking about almost 20 years now. And but like I said, you know, I like it over here. You know, there's plenty to do, you know. But I mean, it's actually not that too different from the UK. There are some differences, like driving on the other side of the road, which I had to learn to do, which it wasn't the challenge that I thought it would be. You know, in England, we'd drive on the left,
yes,
and you know, the steering wheel's on the right. But it actually wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. And, you know, I quickly found that all the ladies liked the English accent, so that was a good thing as well, you know.
You take what works, right?
Yes, it does. But, you know, I like it over here because one of the things I particularly like is that, kind of like me as well, you know, Americans are sort of very proactive about doing things, you know, and getting things done and being enthusiastic and, you know, having dreams and following them, you know, and I like that kind of sort of gung-ho, let's do it kind of approach, you know, and but I just, you know, enjoyed eating foods I'd never seen before or eaten before. Like, one of my favorite foods is gumbo, which is very popular in the South.
Yes.
Somebody said, "You want some gumbo?" When I first came over, I was like, "What's gumbo? You know, is it like a kind of gum or something?" You know,
well, yeah, I could see that confusion.
They're like, no. So, but it wasn't like a culture shock. For me, it was like, it was cool that it was different, you know.
Yes.
And, but, you know, I do get back to the UK to see family and friends about twice a year and, you know, catch up with even old school friends who I haven't seen for years. I went back last summer in July and saw a bunch of school friends. We had a school reunion, some I hadn't seen since I was like 17. And, you know, we all had a time, and I'm sure most of us had a thumping headache the next morning, you know. But yeah, you know, I like it over here, and I said I've been here pretty much 20 years, and yeah, it's a, you know, a nice place to live. And when I first came over, I thought, quite wrongly, you know, that Texas was like desert and cactus, you know, and you know, people rode around on horses everywhere. But you know, I quickly realised that image, it's kind of like the image that people have in England, that it's always foggy, you know, or we all know someone who lives in a castle, you know, which is not really like the case at all. So, you know, it's kind of fun to see the reality when you actually get there. But everybody's, you know, when people hear me talking, they're always, you know, want to know where you're from, you know, what brought you over. And, you know, and I like that everybody's sort of friendly and talkative, you know.
Well, we are almost ridiculously friendly.
Well,
it's a good thing.
At all.
I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But it aids me in what I do, so I'll take that. But we have someone who is, I told you that they bought one of your Bigfoot books.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so now they're interested in talking about Bigfoot. You do all kinds of cryptids, and I love that you are so casual and have such a good time at the Mothman Festival. And I love that statue. Oh my gosh, I had not really seen it.
Mm-hmm.
The moth wings are astounding. But
Actually, it was an elderly guy made that. He died, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, but one elderly guy made the whole thing out of, I think it's made out of stainless steel, but he constructed the whole thing himself. And I mean, it's like, you know, it's like 9 feet tall, I think, altogether. And of course, everybody wants, you know, they want the picture taken by it, but it is a really cool statue.
Well, and it's, to be what it is, it's beautiful.
Oh, it is, yeah. It's a good statue.
I just was amazed by that. But I am going to go ahead and ask you, I know that you do the cryptids research, and I know that David is brilliant at that also. But what drew your interest to things like, to come from ufology to the Bigfoot phenomenon? And I know there's theories out now that these things are interrelated, and is it possible that all of the things that are happening are interdimensional and they just bebop and string is involved with all this? And how did you get there, and what is your take on that?
Well, as far as my take's concerned, I mean, there's no doubt that, John Keel, way back in the 60s, sort of pointed out that there seemed to be a lot of similarities and crossovers between certain cryptozoological creatures and the world of the paranormal and world of UFOs. He talked about how people had seen UFO activity in the same time frame and location as strange creatures like lake monsters and things like that, and Bigfoot type creatures. And Keel came to believe that all of these phenomena were completely interactive with each other. Now, I'm not sure I think everything is interconnected, but I think he did make a good case that some of these crypto creatures are weirder than they seem to be, that they're not necessarily just unknown animals. They could be something more paranormal based or interdimensional. But how I got involved in cryptozoology was that, I mentioned earlier about how I started reading books by people like John Keel and Charles Berlitz and Brad Steiger. And, of course, they didn't just write about UFOs. They wrote about strange creatures as well. Well, Berlitz didn't, but the others did. And so, one of the things that I found was the same that Keel found, that, you'd find parallels. And it turns out that there was one particular little area, a little village just north of me, only about 20 minutes drive, something like that, and a little village called Ranton. And back in 1879, there was this wave of sightings of this strange creature that became known locally as the man monkey, and it was described as like a humanoid figure but covered in hair, and it sort of caused the people in this little village of Ranton to sort of fall into a state of hysteria back in January 1879. And the legends of this story and the sightings sort of persisted. And so when I found out about this story and found out that it actually occurred only like 20 minutes drive away, I went out there, and that was when I was probably about 17 or 18 then, and that was actually the first thing I ever investigated as like a paranormal phenomenon. And I went out there and looked into some of the old newspapers in the archives, that kind of thing, and also sort of spoke to some of the locals and who all knew the story because it just been passed down through the generations. And so that was basically what I did. I found an interesting local story of a Bigfoot type and went knocking on doors, and said, "What do you know about the man monkey?" And and that's how it sort of really began for me, with strange creatures.
Were people forthcoming when you asked the questions?
What's that?
Were people willing to speak with you when you showed up at their door?
Well, I didn't quite literally turn up at their front door, but I did sort of, drop into the local store, or the local pub, that kind of thing, or gas station, and, chat there. Said, I'm, just in the area, just looking into this story. And those people were, very kind of, happy to help. They're like, oh, yeah, my grandfather told me this story about it. And there wasn't too much that was new to add to the story, but there were a few new witnesses that I managed to track down who'd seen this thing years later. And so that was the one that really got me interested in cryptozoology, and the fact that, it was close to where I lived made it, much easier to investigate it. And it was sort of like a, very forested, wooded, sort of almost like a very atmospheric kind of old England type situation, and this strange creature prowling around in the woods. So that's how I really got sort of involved with cryptozoology.
That's interesting. And I had never heard of the man monkey.
Well, I actually did I did a book on the subject, not a long book, only about 120 pages, because there just wasn't too much of a story to tell. It stalled after a while. But
I don't know how I missed that. I've read so much of your stuff.
Well, the book's actually called Man Monkey, so
well, I'm going to go look for that.
Easy to remember, but it's basically like I sort of wrote it I sort of wrote it like a diary kind of journal approach, which sort of followed me doing the investigations. And I still get occasional reports today of this creature, which clearly is some sort of supernatural thing, because people have described it sort of vanishing, and then it comes back. It's almost like a spectral type ape-like animal. So, that's sort of what really got me into, following, the John Keel kind of approach to all this.
Well, I know that I have been fascinated. I met some people last year at an event that I believe it was the North American Dogmen group.
Oh, yeah.
And they had this big mounted, if it were real, it would have been a taxidermy, that kind of a thing, of what they had described to them and what they'd experienced. And it was really my first time to see something like that. Of course, I took my photo with it. But I would not actively go into the woods seeking this out. I'm not afraid of ghosts. I've been in touchy situations with spiritual issues. But a friend of mine is a cryptozoologist, and in fact, he'll be with me on Fate Sunday. But I sit there and I look and I'm like, I don't think I want to hunt something that could eat me. That gives me a little bit of a pause when I contemplate it. But have you experienced a dogman, or have you experienced personally an encounter?
Personally, I haven't, but I have actually investigated a number of dogman stories. Now, for people who may not know what the dogman is, it's kind of like the closest modern day thing you could think of to like a werewolf. Mm-hmm. Now, we're not talking about people like in the movies, bursting out their clothes at a full moon and rampaging around and, killing a bunch of kids in the woods, like in the movies or whatever. Most people, in fact, I would say 99.99% of everyone talks about seeing what looks like a huge wolf-like animal, but which can walk on two limbs and on four limbs. It can predominantly walks on four limbs, but will raise up on its hind legs and can run at speed on its hind legs. So that's why, obviously, you have these sort of parallels with werewolf stories, because it's basically looks, imagine like a bear standing up, but having a head like a German shepherd. Mm-hmm. That's basically the best way to describe how they look. Now, what's interesting is that, some people believe they saw like an unknown form of wolf, that has genetically altered over the centuries, and we haven't found it. We don't know about it. Other people take the view that, could it be something supernatural? Now, the supernatural angle for the dogman's an interesting one, because a lot of sightings of the dogmen have been made by, for example, particularly in Wisconsin, where most of the reports come from, they've often been seen round these ancient mounds, that you can find these mounds all around Wisconsin. A lot of sightings around there, a lot of sightings around graveyards and cemeteries, and also crossroads and bridges, which are also places which typically have legends of supernatural activity surrounding them. So, there is sort of a large body of people who think these things are somehow supernatural. But I actually personally investigated one of these a couple of years ago. It was a case that actually, the event itself occurred back in 1972 in a town in Ohio called Defiance. And I went out there.
I've been there. That's where they started?
What's that?
I've been there. That's where this started?
No, it didn't start there, but that's actually one of the most famous cases.
I misunderstood you. Wow.
Okay. Yeah, but I went, although the case was the summer of 1972 when this all broke out,
right.
I went out there to the town in 2016 with a couple of friends of mine in cryptozoology, Ken Gerhard and Lyle Blackburn, and we sort of, went all around the area, spoke to people, and, the story, as I said, it was 72 when it happened, and we went out in 2016, but a lot of the people there, the old-timers remembered it, and it was actually covered deeply by the local papers, and even the local police in Defiance actually opened a file this werewolf-type sighting. And many of the sightings were made on an old area of railroad track in Defiance, and we actually found the actual piece where the first sighting occurred. But although, you had sort of tales in the newspapers of werewolves, with hindsight today, it sounds like it was a dogman. And the Defiance, if you Google Defiance, Ohio werewolf, you'll actually find a couple of my articles, and you'll also find some older articles and even some transcripts of the original newspaper clippings from the early 70s. So that's sort of like a really interesting, cool case.
That is so neat. And I'm going to tell you that we just blew right back by blah, 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 blah. Easy for me to say. We just blew right by our break, so I'm going to just edit to fix that later because I'm not stopping. But I am so fascinated by that. I have just absolutely been blown away. The place that I had that paranormal experience that I was telling you about is in Paulding, Ohio, which is 17 miles from Defiance. I stay in Defiance when I go there. So,
cool.
It's a small world.
Yeah.
Much smaller for you because you've been all over it. But it's just really an interesting coincidence in my mind.
Well, yeah, if you go there again, I mean, if you check out the old railroad track, you'll find it easy. And, for those people who were alive at the time, it's almost like their Roswell, that Roswell, the town, was made famous by the crash. And even though it's not quite that scale in Defiance, everybody of a certain age, remembers it. So.
Well, I believe I know exactly where that is because I've spent a couple of Saturday mornings roaming around that area. So, holy wow.
Yeah.
That got my attention. Well, I am curious that the difference between dogman research and, well, I'm going to ask you this first about the dogman before we move on. I have been told by people that have experienced them that they are almost, well, not almost, but their communication is telepathic. That when they were coming up to where a group of armed men were, they didn't exhibit fear. They created fear. And that to a person, not one man raised his weapon because they had a strong indication that would not end well for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've not personally come across that angle, but there are a lot of weird stories where people saw the dogman and they got this strange vibe that it was sort of not just physically dangerous, but it was sort of like supernaturally evil. They got like this sense of like malevolent sense from it. And there are other cases where, people have seen like strange lights in the sky when the dogman was seen. Not so much like UFOs, but like weird balls of light flying over it and hovering above it. And so, there's certain things that sort of do take the dogman phenomena out of the category of it just being some bizarre kind of strange of wolf. It's
yes.
There's way more to it than that, and a lot of it ties in with Native American legends, of shape-shifting creatures and things like that. So, Linda Godfrey, a good friend of mine, she's written like either 5 or 6 books now on the subject, and because there's so many accounts and so many witnesses who've come forward, it's like a huge phenomenon, really.
Well, I am always fascinated by things like that because it just is so unexpected. It's a totally different experience from most Bigfoot stories.
Well, some people do wonder if, people are mistaking Bigfoot for a dogman. I could see that possibly happening late at night in some cases, but the problem is everybody talks about seeing this huge, long snout like a muzzle, you know, like on a German Shepherd, and it's difficult to reconcile that with a Bigfoot, you know, which has more of like an ape-like face. So, you know, in that sense, I personally, I don't think the people are mistaking Bigfoot, but some researchers do, you know.
Well, I was about to ask you, and we got the question in chat as well. I have experienced the lights, the spook lights, I guess for lack of a better term, at Thomas Divide and the Cherokee National Park. And at some point, I hope to join a friend's expedition going to Brown Mountain to investigate the lights there, although that one has me a bit more aware of what the possibilities are in that investigation. But have you
can find reports like those lights, strange lights everywhere. There's not too far from me, there's a area of forest called the Big Thicket.
Yes.
Now they get Bigfoot reports and strange lights as well. So, you know, there are a lot of really, you know, odd things going on. So,
well, I find those interesting because my husband was all fine with me going to Brown Mountain until he learned that there had been, you know, disappearances, abductions, whatever, and that the search parties who were looking for one of the individuals, actually two of the individuals, the search parties disappeared as well. And at that point, he was not quite as okay with the idea as he had been originally. But the Thomas Divide lights are quite different in that they're multicolored. I see them every time I go to look for them, but they're supposed to be unusual. One of the forest rangers said that her children have gone up to Thomas Divide every chance they get and have never seen them. And I just thought that you saw them, it's like a show, right?
Yeah.
But I do know that they show up everywhere. You know, Denise in chat says that hers are in Joplin, Missouri. And I know that I think that goes back toward Native American tales and experiences as well. Because it's always, you know, it's always a divide of some type. It's in a mountainous region.
Yeah.
And when you have a divide like that, then, you know, they show up. It just fascinates me. And having seen them, and they were a little sneaky, they showed, you know, usually they're across from me. And time before last that I went, I noticed that while I was trying to do something with my camera, I looked up and one was on my side of the divide. And I thought, you know, I'm not really cool with this, and I'm sure you mean no harm, but I'm just going to leave right now. But my name is Kat, and if you see me again, you'll know it's me. And maybe we'll talk. And I left.
That's not a bad way to handle it, you know, sort of like an interaction, if you can do it, you know.
Well, I didn't screech off, you know. I was in my husband's little car, but, you know, I didn't want to startle it just because I was startled. And have you, when you're doing your research and stuff, and when you go out and you're doing stuff with your friends, and y'all are talking about all of these things, what is the predominant thought on that?
What, about doing research, you mean?
Field research on these.
I think, you know, doing field research is the best approach you can take. You know, I mean, you can find a ton of material on the internet about Bigfoot or the Chupacabra, but you're not literally going to find them on the internet. You know, you've got to go out looking for these things. I mean,
yes.
Good example is a good friend of mine, Shelley Montana, and Shelley lives in the Dallas area as well, and she quite literally goes out into the Pacific Northwest woods every year for about 3 months. You know, like 20, 30 miles into the woods. I'm not kidding. You know, she goes out there for that amount of time. You know, she takes her truck and she takes she's got like a filter device so she can drink stream water for 3 months, and takes huge amounts of like dried food, which you can sort of fix like a little oven, to your back car battery, and cook food that way. And she literally does that for like 3 months out in the woods, and she's had some good experiences, and one really almost clear encounter with a Bigfoot type creature. And Shelley, I think quite rightly points out that, well, she's out there, in the woods for 3 months. Most people aren't doing that, and they certainly aren't doing it miles and miles deep into the Pacific Northwest forest, and I think not everybody has the ability or the time to do that. Fortunately, Shelley can. And if you ever had on a show, you get a really cool show, because she can tell you about all her experiences and, the hazards of going on expeditions like this, but also the benefits and the good things that can come out of it. But I mean, she's dedicated to sort of that 3-month period of finding what she can. And I think that is the best way to do it, is if you have the ability and the time, etc., the best way to get the answers, or the most likely way to get the answers, is to actually go and look for them,
Well, I have found that if you want to know the facts about anything, the best way to do that is just to go and find them.
Yeah, yep. I mean, so for some people it is difficult.
If you have that opportunity, you're right. Like your friend Shelley being able to do that, not everyone can.
No, that's right. They can't. And if you happen to live in an area where, fortunately, there is active Bigfoot reports, or you live 10 miles away from a lake that has a lake monster tradition attached to it, in those situations it does make it easier if there's something almost on your doorstep. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is unfortunate, that I can't do that. I can't take 3 months off and just vanish. Not many people can, but the ones who can do it and who do it usually are the ones who have some success, because they really are dedicated and spending so much time, in terms of doing what they can just to get the answers.
Well, and then they share them, which is the best part.
Exactly. Me and Shelley, every October, we do a series of lectures at the school, what's called the Highland Park school area in Dallas, and we go and lecture to the kids every year about on cryptozoology, and the kids are all sort of 7, 8, 9 years old, and they love hearing stories all about Bigfoot and the Chupacabra and Nessie, and it's kind of like a cool thing for Halloween we do for them, where they can have a couple of hours, instead of doing math or history or geography, they get a lecture on monsters, so they kind of love that break from regular lessons and classes, so we do that every Halloween, and it usually coincides where Shelley's just come back, say, after, a few months out there, so she's got all new photographs and stories to tell the kids and so on.
That's
and
brilliant.
It's a good way to get kids, outside as well, It encourages them to get outside and play and have a good time as well. So.
Well, anything that will get a child outside and using their imagination is a wonderful thing. There's not enough of that anymore.
Mm-mm. Well, we kind of do like a fun series of lectures for them, where it's a little bit kind of spooky but fun and exciting, and sort of, and they kind of get a kick out of that, sort of wondering what's coming next,
Well, I think it's wonderful. And how did you get the school system to let you in to do that? That's a
Funnily enough,
thing.
actually, one of the teachers contacted me and said, we'd like to do something different a little bit for like the Halloween period, and instead of just having the kids sort of in a fun day dressing up as witches and zombies or whatever, they'd looked me up and saw that I live locally and that I'd investigated things like Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, and lake monsters, all that kind of stuff. And they said, would you be interested in coming along and doing a lecture that talks, that would be entertaining and fun for them, but also looks at the idea that they really do exist and how you go and look for them. So that's what I did, and then I think it was after the second year, then Shelley started coming with me, and we've been doing it now for about 5 or 6 years, something like that now. And but what's kind of cool is that after every lecture, the teachers get all the kids to send artwork and paintings and crayon drawings of the things we talked about, like in the lectures. And so that's cool. We get sort of huge packages of artwork, where somebody's done sort of 6-year-old kid's done a picture of the chupacabra chasing a Bigfoot or something like that, And somebody sent me this little girl who was about 7. She sent like a painting, and it was a picture of the chupacabra, and next to it was a man, and the chupacabra got the man's arm in his mouth.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, so I thought that was quite funny, that she should actually think about not just drawing the chupacabra, but a picture of it tearing this guy's arm off.
Well, that's a whole different side of the imagination.
Yeah, I thought, well, she may turn out, to be a monster hunter,
Well, she may be. Or, a set director, set designer. Well,
but I thought it was kind of refreshing as well that, the kids at the Highland Park School, they really enjoy it and they really get into it, and a lot of it is, teaching people about, going out into the woods and having fun, and also being aware, of the hazards out there. So, they learn something and they have a lot of fun for Halloween,
Just brilliant. And you know what? We're actually going to take this break just to be different. Why not? But I am having so much fun, and I would like to talk about the chupacabras when we come back, if that's okay, because that's something I don't know much about, and I find them fascinating.
Okay.
And this is going to be 2 minutes. We will be right back with you. Thanks for being here.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Hello there, welcome back. Amazingly enough, this is our final segment with Nick Redfern. This has gone so quickly. We have covered all kinds of information, and Nick, thank you. And thank you for being so receptive to ideas that people had about things that they've wanted to learn from you. And
Oh, well, thanks. I always try and, if I can help people or give some advice or just entertain them, or a bit of everything. I think, it's in today's world, which is a bit grim, it doesn't hurt to sort of, think about other things. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And now it's my turn. I want to learn more about chupacabras. Okay. I've seen the little different television shows with the videos of them running down the road and stuff like that. I've seen the one that was taxidermied. Mm-hmm. Are these real creatures?
Well, yeah, they are. I mean, I actually wrote a book 3 years ago called Chupacabra Road Trip, which was all about the various expeditions I've been on looking for the chupacabra, and last month it got republished by another company, and still available, but it's sort of got more pictures in than the original one. But I've been on a lot of expeditions looking for the original chupacabra, which surfaced out of Puerto Rico in 1995. And first time I went to Puerto Rico was in 2004, and it was with a crew from the Sci-Fi Channel for a show that was called Proof Positive. And I think the episode might actually be somewhere on YouTube. It was at one point.
I've seen it, yes.
Maybe it got took down, I'm not sure. But I've been on a lot of expeditions to Puerto Rico and around the US and Brazil and a few other Central America places like that, Mexico, looking for these creatures. Now, it gets a bit confusing because there are two types of chupacabra. There's the original one on Puerto Rico, which is described as like a two-legged creature with this sort of like a row of spikes going down its head and neck, and sometimes bat-like wings. But then you have the one in the United States, which looks like a sort of a giant rat, which actually it isn't. Now, the big differences between the two is that the Puerto Rican one is said to sort of, almost like a vampire, said to live on blood. And some people have wondered if the Puerto Rican chupacabra could be an unknown type of giant bat, which is an interesting theory. Yeah. Now, as far as the US one's concerned, this sort of hairless dog-like animal, in some cases we actually have corpses of them, and DNA has shown them to be, that they do have coyote DNA. But the big question is, why do they look so weird? Now, veterinarians have suggested that it could be mange, which is a condition which causes the animals to lose their hair. Right. But usually they lose their hair in like tufts, so there's like hair here and there's none there and there's some there and there's none there. And they get very irritated and they scratch themselves to where they bleed, and then infection sets in and they get sick and ill and they die. I guess the closest analogy for us would be like when, as a kid you get chicken pox and you're just itching all the time, It's kind of like that. But it doesn't seem to be mange that they've got, because they're 100% hairless, and their pups have been found, or seen, I should say, and they're completely hairless. So it's almost as if, for reasons we don't know, there's a spontaneous physical change occurring in coyotes in the US all across the country. Now, in some cases, they're not just hairless, they have sort of this weird overbite on their jaw, where, the jaw should be, the top jaw and the bottom jaw should be together, but the top jaw is longer, and they have these shorter front legs, so they have this weird hopping movements like a kangaroo, and some people have said they've seen them sort of rise up on their back legs as well, and they have these strange pouches on their back legs, and so there's a lot of weird aspects to these American US chupacabras that sort of leads to the idea that, for reasons we don't understand, we're dealing with a known animal, but what's unknown is why they're mutating and changing. We don't really have an answer for that. Although a friend of mine, Ken Gerhard, has noticed that where there have been clusters of these chupacabra creatures in the US, they're very often close to coal-burning facilities. Now, one of the side effects of coal burning facilities is what's called sulfur dioxide.
Mm-hmm.
And sulfur dioxide is what's called a mutagen. And it's basically a mutagen. If it gets in your bloodstream, in your body, and particularly like for a pregnant woman or pregnant animal, it can cause massive changes, genetic changes to the creature or the baby. So Ken has wondered if it could be something along these lines, that like mutagens are getting into the food supply, the water supply, and quite literally changing these animals. But the original one in Puerto Rico was a very different one. And when I went to, every time I've been to Puerto Rico looking for the original Chupacabra stories, people have shared their accounts with me, like veterinarians, police officers, farmers, members of the public. And there's several theories as to what's going on in Puerto Rico. There's some people who believe that the Puerto Rican Chupacabra was some sort of alien creature. Others believe that it could be something created in like a secret lab, like a genetic experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other people who think it could be something supernatural or even sort of, devilish in some respects. So there's a lot of theories and questions, but not many answers. But I've spoken to a lot of really credible people, both in the US and in Puerto Rico, and there's no doubt in my mind that the Chupacabra in both areas, Puerto Rico and mainland US, there's clearly, they are clearly real animals. What they are, though, that's the big issue. But in the book Chupacabra Road Trip, it's written like a diary and a journal, just following me across from 2004 to 2016, all the expeditions, and speaking, to all the different people and illustrating it with a lot of, photographs that I took on the expeditions. And, again, I think like with Shelley, I spent a lot of time on Puerto Rico in the same way she does in the woods over here. And I think that, again, is the best way to try and get the answers, is because it's only when you actually get out there and you gain the confidence of the people in Puerto Rico that they realize you're not going to poke fun, you just genuinely are looking for the answers, and then they're happy to open up, and share their stories.
That's just amazing. And, I love that writing style because you can you feel like you're there.
Well, the main reason why I do that is because I think if you're doing an expedition in the fields, in the woods, or in the lakes, or whatever, I think it's easier to write the book based on your memories of actually how it all went down,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could have written it in the data, the facts, but I prefer to write it from the perspective, it was a dark and stormy night, and I jumped in the car and headed out looking for the Chupacabra, that kind of thing. I think people kind of like to, sort of where they become part of the story. They follow you in the expedition. And,
absolutely.
People like that sort of diary journal approach,
Well, and it just flows because you're kind of right there in the mind with you,
yeah,
and experiencing it yourself as you go. How cool is that?
Yeah, and as I said, I think people, it's not just that they like it, I think they get an image in their mind of how the area looks, and that's why I always like to use as many pictures as I can in a book. I mean, some publishers, they try and limit you how many pictures you can use, and others are fine about it, but I think, if you can use a lot of pictures, photographs, it does, it's good from the perspective of the reader to actually say, oh, there's the farm or the ranch he's talking about, or that's the area where the little village where the creature was seen. I think people can sort of relate to the story better when they've got, the pictures to look at the same time.
I would agree with that. And besides, pictures tell stories all of their own.
What's that, sorry?
I said pictures tell stories all on their own, too.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I mean, it is true. When they say, picture paints 1,000 words, it does. I mean, you read somebody's name in the book and then you see them in a photograph talking to me with a film crew or with a colleague out there. And then they see it's a real person. It's not just a name on a page,
Absolutely. Well, you know, we've got 5 minutes left. I can't believe this has gone so swiftly. But would you like to tell people where they're going to be able to find you? I know you've got your upcoming events on your website, but
almost pretty much my conferences and lectures are done for this year pretty much now. But I've got a few things going on next year, which people can I'll be actually listing them in a week or so, the 2019 lectures and conferences that are booked already. People can find them at my blog. If you Google Nick Redfern, World of Whatever, the first link will take you to my own blog. And I try and update that most days with news and articles I've written and things like that. And people can find me at Facebook. There are actually quite a few Nick Redferns at Facebook, but if you type in Nick Redfern, fortunately my name pops up first. So if people have got any questions, or they want some advice, or they want to share a story, I'm always happy and pleased to chat with people, because it's like I always say, the witnesses are the most important people. Without the witnesses, we've got nothing to go on. So, if people want to share a story, or if they want help, or they want advice, or they got a question, I'm always pleased to hopefully answer the question for them. So.
Well, if not, I know you'll be researching it in no time and have an answer. And there'll probably be a book about it.
There might be, yeah.
I don't doubt that for not 1 second. I have just so enjoyed this, and the people in chat are like, we can't wait till you come back. So,
I mean, I've actually got you mentioned the conspiracy book in
yes.
next, but I've actually got another one out in January, which is like a full-length history. All of Area 51. It's like a full-length book all about Area 51.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
how did I miss that? What do you have the title?
It's called Area 51. I like a really original title,
Well, that's fantastic.
And thanks. That one will be out. I think it's out on January the 2nd, something like that. So, but copies you typically do kind of sort of creep through a week or two early. Amazon get them early, and then they put them on sometimes a little bit early, and so. But it probably will be round about the January mark when it'll surface. So.
Well, my husband will be cringing, so it's so funny because he's like, "Who's your guest this week?" Because I saw that we had some, book activity, and little does he know I buy the books like months in advance, so that's okay. But he's gotten used to seeing your name come across the screen.
Oh.
And I am just so appreciative of you taking the time and giving so much of your time to me and my listeners.
I enjoy doing it, and I think it's important to sort of give something back to the readers as well. I don't really have much time for these. So there's certain, not that many, thankfully, but some people in ufology and cryptozoology, big egos, and they don't want to spend time with people. They want to do this and do that, or go back to the hotel room. But I feel that if someone is going to buy my books, and spend their money, and they come along to a conference, then it's only right for me, to hang out with them and have a good time, whether, sort of chatting at the book table or a beer at the bar or whatever. I think, and I don't do it out of duty. I do it because I enjoy hanging out with people and getting to know them, and see what they think about this book or that book, and we just have a good time. And I think that's that social aspect is as important to me as the research. You want to be able to leave the conferences making new friends and having a good time, but also learn stuff as well.
I tell you what, that's my favorite aspect of doing what I do, is the opportunity to learn from people like you.
Thanks.
I'm fortunate. And that being said, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining me. And
thanks, Kat. Thank you.
When you're ready, we'll do this again. And
all right.
For my guests, thank y'all. You're the reason we do this, and I will see you Same cat time, same cat channel. Don't forget Friday is Ghost Talk Radio with Shelley Robertson and 187 PI. Sunday is Fate Radio with yours truly. And Monday will be the Paranormal Pride. Have a great weekend. Keep your chin up and go out there and be the change you want to see. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.